Hello, everyone. On this next recording of the wonderful world of macroeconomics, we're going to change a little bit of direction here, and we're going to talk about average price levels, and we're going to talk about FLATION. What's FLATION? Well, FLATION doesn't mean anything without the prefixes to it. And so we're going to talk about FLATION both in, D, and dis, and then connect that to FLATION. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what most everything that we come across, or what is generally experienced in the price levels in our life, over time it is inflation. So let's figure out what inflation is. Okay. And what it isn't. Inflation is when the average level of prices is going up. It's the movement itself when the average level of prices is going up. If, say, an apple suddenly costs $5, is that inflation? No, it's not. That's just a high price. The inflation talks about the movement of it. So when the average level of prices is increasing, that is inflation. And comparatively high prices are the result of it, but it's not inflation itself. That's the movement, okay? So generally, prices go up over time, okay? In some cases, and in some cases this has happened, we might have heard of deflation. Okay. Deflation is when the average level of prices is going down. That kind of, it seems in my lifespan, deflation happens about once every couple of ice ages. Doesn't happen too often, but that's when the average level of prices is going down. Now, one thing that we have experienced is what is called, and this isn't mentioned in your book, which I think is a big oversight. What we do experience is called disinflation, and you need to know the difference between these things. Disinflation. Now, disinflation is basically inflation, but it's inflation at a comparatively lower rate than previous. So if the prices, say, if we're comparing 2018 and 2017, the prices are still going up, but say they went up higher, say they went up 4% in 2018 or 2017, and in 2018 they only went up 2%, something like that. Well, that would be disinflation. Again, the prices are going up, but they're going up slower. Okay. So some things stupidly priced or ridiculously priced high, like athletic wear nowadays. I hate to sound like my parents again, but when I was a little kid, you couldn't buy a pair of tennis shoes, that's what we called them, tennis shoes, for more than about $20 or so. Maybe the real nice one's $30. But now, in some cases, they're paying for brand names of athletic shoes. They're paying, what, $300 for a pair? Well, again, that is still not inflation. That is just a really dumb high price, okay? Now, like anything else, there's implications to inflation and deflation. Disinflation, we're just going to say that the implications of that are the same as inflation, but at a slower rate. Okay, so we're not going to talk really except defining what disinflation is. Hello. I almost wrecked my P51 there. Sorry about that. Okay. So let's talk about inflation. Is inflation a good thing? Well, most people think that inflation is always a bad thing. That's common thought. So if that's the case, would deflation be a good thing? Well, remember when I asked you what the answer to every single economic question is? It depends who's talking. Because of scarcity, nothing benefits everybody without hurting somebody. Conversely, nothing hurts everybody economically without benefiting someone. And it's the same with inflation and deflation. So inflation. Let's talk about that. That is when the average price goes up. First of all, let's consider this. When the prices go up, what does that do to the value or the purchasing power of your money? It goes down. Okay? So when the price goes up, since you pay things with money, the purchasing power of your money goes down. You can't buy as much. Okay? So inflation is bad, except, okay, it's not so bad when you think of it for borrowers. Okay. When there's borrowers, when you borrow money, you hope for inflation. Inflation is a good thing. Why? Because it's all related to the purchasing power of your money. So if the price levels are steadily going up, the price levels will be higher when you have to pay the money back than when you borrowed it. So when you borrow something with a lower price level, your purchasing power is higher, so you can buy more stuff. It's like you're buying more or borrowing more. Okay? But when you pay it back, as the average price level goes up, your money is less and less valuable in the sense of purchasing power. So you're borrowing a whole lot and you don't have to pay much back. Okay? So inflation is really good for borrowers because they have better use of their money now, and they pay back their money when they don't have such powerful money to play around with. Okay. So at the same time, if inflation is good for the borrower, guess who it's bad for? The lender. Inflation is bad for the lender because the same thing. When they lend somebody money, they're parting with their money. Okay? They're parting with their money, which has good purchasing power when they lend it, but as the price levels go up, when they get the money paid back, their money's not worth as much. So they're actually lending a lot more and getting a lot less back in repayment. Okay, so it's again, is inflation good? It depends who's talking. Okay. Now, deflation is not all good either, because it would be just the opposite. Deflation would be bad for the borrower and good for the lender. Because, say you borrow some money. If the price levels are going down, the money that you borrow and buy stuff with, it won't be as valuable as when you have to pay it back. So it's like you're borrowing less and paying more back. And the same is exactly the opposite with lenders. If it's deflation, the money that they're lending you, it's not really a big stress to them because it doesn't buy much now. But when they get the payment back, then the money will be much more powerful and have much more purchasing power. Okay, what is hyperinflation? Hyperinflation, nobody really likes. It's generally not good. It could be good for speculators and things like that, but most people consider hyperinflation bad. Hyperinflation is when prices change by the hour or the minute, and prices get really ridiculous for basic commodities. Now, I think I told you in class, I used to collect stamps because I was kind of a dull kid, kept to myself a lot. So I bought this little 1 mark stamp. That's how it was engraved and printed. It was 1 mark from Germany, the Weimar Republic, which existed from 1920 to 1933, and we all know who took power then. But it was a disastrous government. But anyway, when the stock market crash hit and spread its effects to all over the world, that 1 mark stamp was stamped and with a new sum that it was worth 50 million marks. So it went from 1 mark to mail letter to 50 million marks. And there's plenty, you might find that interesting sometime. Just go search the web for the economic impacts of the Weimar Republic, and that would be an interesting term paper if any of you want to do it. But essentially what would happen is that the government, mindful that it might not be able to pay off its debts, which was the case of the Weimar Republic. The roaring 20s were roaring in Berlin because the government borrowed huge sums of money. Then they found, behold, they weren't able to pay it back. So what they did to try to stabilize, they did the worst possible thing. They printed out tons and tons of money to try to meet their obligations. And so the money, as the money supply went up, and this is just an illustration here. We'll get more into the money supply and demand. But the cost of money, of course, is the interest rate. And we have the amount of money out there, say Deutschmarks, in this case. We have a demand for money, okay? And for reasons that we will get into right after the midterm, the supply of money is set by the governments, and so the supply curve of money is basically straight. So what they do in this case is that they greatly increased the amount